learn your sciences, but you learn, like the reason you're doing this is to learn Torah. And so your one primary job in Bet Sefer, and we've discovered that girls also attended Bet Sefer at a much higher rate than we originally thought. So girls and boys alike, mostly boys, but even a good portion of girls, are going to Bet Sefer to memorize Torah. And when I say memorize, over the course of those 4 or 5 years, you're wanting to commit Torah to memory, to have such a familiarity with Torah that you are, you're able to start quoting, like a rabbi could be quoting anywhere in Torah. He could pick a book. He could pick Exodus and just start quoting, not tell you it's Exodus, not tell you where he's quoting, just start quoting in Exodus, stop mid-sentence, point to you, and you would need to be able to pick up quoting right where he left off without hesitation and keep quoting. This is the familiarity by the time you're done with Bet Sefer that you're wanting to have with the books of Moses. I mean, it's just unbelievably intimidating to consider what that worldview would have been like. But that's Bet Sefer. Now, how many people do you suppose, Jim, are making it through that schooling?
Not many.
Not many. You would have to have you'd have to be gifted. You would have to be so well studied and just have some natural talent to be able to pull this off. So scholars still debate. Is it 1%? Is it less than 1%? Is it higher than, could it be 2 or 3 or 4%? But we're talking single digits in the percentage of students that are moving on to the next level of Jewish schooling, which there's a lot of historical debate. Is it Bet Midrash? Is it Bet Talmud? It's one of the two. We just don't know exactly how it worked after Bet Sefer. That's the one that's well recorded in history. But eventually you move on to what I'm going to call, what do I have on my slide, Brent?
Beit Midrash.
Beit Midrash. And Beit Midrash is going to be ages 10 to 13. It's going to be 10 to around your bar or bat mitzvah. Now, girls at this point, we believe, are out of the education system, whether that's cultural demands or cultural stigmas or whatever it is. As far as we know, we don't see too many females ever in this level of education. But Bet Midrash is where you're going to memorize the rest of Tanakh. Obviously, you have a lot of raw talent and raw ability. You've made it past Bet Sefer. Consider, by the way, that 99% of the Jewish population is at this point, you've been told by some rabbi, some teacher, you've been told by the instructor, you obviously love God, and I've seen how much you love Torah, but you don't have what it takes. Go home and pray that your children will be able to do what you could not. Sounds totally damning in our culture, but in their culture, it doesn't carry that same stigma because 99% of it's not like you're going home hanging your head because everybody's looking at you going, oh, you too? Yeah, we all had that experience except for this 1% cream of the crop that got the opportunity to move on. So they're going to memorize the rest of Tanakh. Now, if you're sitting there with your Bible, grab that Bible and hold the chunk of Genesis through Malachi in your hand and try to just grasp in the next 3 years the concept of people committing the rest of that book to memory. But that's what they did in Bet Midrash from ages 10 to 13. After that, if you were really the best of the best, you might apply to be what they're called a Talmid, a disciple. And if you thought you had what it took, you had not just scripture committed to memory, but you had a working knowledge and a raw ability to interact with and interpret that text. You didn't have the authority to interpret it, but if you thought you could get into that kind of world, you would apply to a rabbi. That rabbi would grill you. By the way, we could put this in show notes. I would recommend Ray Vanderlaan has a video about this, in his That the World May Know series. And, Rob Bell also did a Pneuma titled Dust. And it puts it in a really nice 10-minute concise package, to talk about this as well. But if you thought that you had what it takes, this rabbi would grill you. He would ask you a ton of questions. He would try to just test you and put you under scrutiny to see if you had what it took to be like him. Because the goal, and you'll see this at the bottom of your slide there on the presentation, the goal is to know what the rabbi knows in order to do what the rabbi does for the reasons that the rabbi does them in order to be just like your rabbi in his walk with God. To know what the rabbi knows in order to do what the rabbi does for the reasons that the rabbi does them in order to be just like the rabbi in their walk with God. What I hope to convey, and I've been talking for a long time, so we need to cut this thing off, but what I hope to convey in this podcast, the Judaism that arose from the ashes of exile, as we said at the beginning of this podcast, the Judaism that arose was not the Judaism that went into exile. And I know that we love as Christians to throw Judaism under the bus and the Pharisees, and we talk about they're just so legalistic and they just miss the point, and how could they be so stupid? I think we need to really check ourselves before we do that, because this was a people, if we had a fraction of the devotion to the text that they had, we'd be making massive steps forward. And they just had an absolute devotion to learning the ways of God. And so this is what we see in the Jesus story. I mean, obviously Jesus goes out and he calls a bunch of people, and what are they doing, Jim, when Jesus goes out and finds them? At least most of them.
Fishing.
Yeah, they're fishing. What does that tell us? It means that, what does it tell us, Jim?
They're just common people.
Yeah, well, at some point during the education system, what must have happened?
They weren't good enough.
They weren't good enough, which is what 99% of people were. So they got told to go home and ply their father's trades. That's what Peter and Andrew are doing. There's James and John. What are they doing? They're fishing, but who are they fishing with? Brent, who are they fishing with?
Is it with their father?
Yeah, fishing with their father. So what does that mean? If they're fishing with their father, these guys haven't even been bar mitzvahed yet, because if they've been bar mitzvahed, they'd be fishing on their own. They'd be grown men plying their father's trade on their own. So that means they're younger than 13. James and John are like 11 or 12, 10 years old. How old are these guys? Now we have to be honest and remember that a 13-year-old in their culture is the same as an 18, 19, 20-year-old in our culture. But even still, these are young kids. These aren't 30-year-old bearded men that we see in all the videos and movies following Jesus around. These are young kids. And we'll talk more about that, because there's good evidence to suggest that Peter was the only one that even gets close to maybe 18, 19, 20, 21, maybe, but probably not. We'll talk more about that later. But these are young kids, and somewhere along the way, just like Jim pointed out, they've been told, you obviously love God and you love Torah, but this isn't for you. And Jesus goes out and he walks on the beach and he calls them. And have you ever been in Bible studies? And everybody, what is the observation that everybody makes, Jim? When we're sitting in Bible study and they drop their nets and everybody asks the question. What's the question that they always ask?
Why did they drop their nets?
Yeah. Why did they, I can't believe they just dropped they just dropped their nets and left? I can't believe they did that. Well, yeah, they just got given like this.
They didn't even go home to give their mom a hug?
Yeah. My goodness, they just left everything in the water? Yes. I mean, they're jumping out of the boat. They're yelling at their friend who's 100 yards away like, hey, bring my boat to shore. Tell Dad I got invited to go follow a rabbi. And trust me, their parents are not upset when they get home or when they don't come home and somebody else brings them news to them. Their family throws a party because some rabbi invited them to be, scholars estimate, maybe 100 Talmudim, maybe 100 disciples in the first century. We know of 5 rabbis in the first century. Jesus, Gamliel the elder, Gamliel the younger, Hillel, Shammai, that whole era of about 100, 150, 200 years. We know of 5, 6, 7 rabbis. We assume that maybe there was more. So maybe there's 10, 12 rabbis. Some rabbis had 1 disciple. Some rabbis had multiple disciples. So scholars estimate, 100 disciples. 100 disciples in a people group of 6 million Jews. I mean, that's the small group of people we're talking about here.
But even on top of that, like, those are the people who have the instantaneous mid-sentence recall.
Oh, absolutely.
But the entire culture has
Yes.
this devotion to the text.
Yes.
Where their familiarity with Torah
Oh
is
my goodness.
vastly beyond what we have today.
Even the ones that get told to go home could run circles around a whole room of us educated, internet-educated, doctrine, Bible-believing evangelicals today. Even some of the least educated people in their day knew their text because they didn't have it. And the whole reason we got into this was you were asking about scrolls. And we asked the question, how do you know? You know because as a community, you've committed it to memory. The Chazan, the leaders, there are people that have memorized it. They may not have it on immediate recall, but they have it all memorized, and you can study it and read it and recite it to each other. This is the world of Jesus, and this is going to be important for us to understand.
We'll run into some of those characters with Jesus where it's like, wow, how do they know that?
Absolutely.
And this is it.
Man, I feel like, and I know, where are we at? We're at like 40 minutes. We're back to 40-minute podcast. That's what I'm talking about. And I feel like there's still so much, like I'm just sitting here like scrambling because I feel like we're merely scratching the surface of things that we really need to unpack.